All right, hey everyone. So today I'll be talking about how to start using Anki at PittMed. This is really a quick start guide for people that haven't started yet, or maybe for people that want just a refresher on how to use Anki. I just want to preface this with this isn't the only way to do it, and there are a lot of other people in our class that probably do it better than I do. But it's just a guide, and there's really a lot of ways that you can use Anki. What we'll be talking about today is just how to download it and other stuff that we have to download. Some of the settings, which are quite important. How to integrate Anki with the PittMed curriculum. Sample workflows for people, and additional resources. So let's get started with just downloading Anki. And throughout all of this first portion, I already have everything downloaded, so I'm just going to kind of talk through it, but not actually download it. You can pause just to save some time. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is download the actual app, and that is that website. So I have a Mac. I'm going to press this, download that, and secondly, uh, we're going to download a deck. So here you have two options, or two main options. One is Zonky, which is the one that people use most often. It's quite popular. There's also Lightyear, which has a little bit less cards. I'm going to use Zonky today just because that's something I use every day, and it's the one I chose. So you can click this link. It's going to take you here, and you're going to click this comment, I guess, this link by Pineapples 9. This is the most updated deck so far. And lastly, for downloading add-ons, once you get to this stage, you want to open Anki and ignore what I have right here for now. Just open your Anki. It should be blank. Go to Tools, go to Add-ons, Get Add-ons, and you're going to be asked for a code. So these codes for add-ons are all on those links that I mentioned. For this load balancer one, you can scroll down, copy paste this into the code. So let me do that just to show you guys. I'll do that, press OK, and then I'll have that add-on. Make sure that after you add all of these add-ons that you actually just close the application, just so that it can actually sync, and then you will have those add-ons. Okay? So pause the video if you have to do all of that. Great. So next we're going to move on to Anki settings. So once you have all of that downloaded, the first thing you want to do is obviously make sure that you get the deck into Anki. So what you can do is just search for it in your downloads folder, and mine is, I should have it somewhere, so let me just make sure I have that. Yep, so I have that in my downloads folder. I'm just going to click on it, and it should show up here as Anki. It does take a little bit of time just because it is a pretty big deck. So once you have that, you're going to see that there are huge numbers next to it. So let me just show you what that would look like. So you should see huge numbers running down like that, right? The first thing you want to do when you download that is just click that so it doesn't look so scary. Secondly, go to Anki in your browser and just click a card, select all, so Command A or Control A if you're on Windows, right click and toggle suspend. So your cards are all suspended if they're yellow, and now you'll see that you don't have any new cards or any due cards for this Anki deck. Okay, great. And we'll talk about how to use that deck in a little bit. Now I'm going to walk through just a little bit about the program and what it does. It's basically a flashcard program on steroids, and these are flashcards, so things that you can use to test yourself, plus they're spaced out over time such that you can selectively choose cards that you're weaker at to study and cards that you're really good at to kind of push out and not study as often, because the goal here is to learn more and you want to be studying the stuff that you're not so strong at, right? So the first thing I'm going to teach you here is just how to create a deck. So that's pretty simple. There's a button here you can do. I'm going to name it 110 just to show you guys something that I think might be helpful. So second thing, you want to click on 110, you want to make a card. So now we're just going to add, I have an add-on for cats, but we're going to add a card here. So this is the front of my flashcard. Oh, I already made that one, so let's do that. And let's make the answer that, and we're going to add that card. So now I have one card here. So blue denotes a new card, red denotes a card that is you're currently learning it, and green denotes a card that's in review phase. So any card that really isn't in new phase is either in review or is something that you're currently reviewing. So we have one new card here. So I'm going to show answer. I think I know this, and this is 3. So now you're given 3 options. One is the red, which is 1 minute. If you get it wrong, it's going to come back in 1 minute. If you got it right, it's going to come back in 10 minutes. And if you found it really easy, it's going to come back in 4 days. So why does this matter? We'll talk about that here in the next section with the options. So let's click on the gear and go into options. And this looks pretty intimidating. This is like a pretty confusing for a lot of people. I'm going to assume that you guys all downloaded the add-ons that I mentioned, because there is one here. It's called Load Balance. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is the steps. So the steps are, if you think of a staircase, these are the different steps that you take in order for a card to reach a certain level, and that level is called the graduating interval. So once a card has completed all these steps, it will graduate into Anki's algorithm. So this isn't, the algorithm is something you don't have to understand. It's just something that's scientifically proven to kind of like maximize your long-term retention. So until then, until you manage all these steps, you're not going to hit that interval. And these things we're not going to change today. This stuff we're not going to change either. The only thing I'm going to change here, or explain, is the steps and also how many new cards you have per day. So depending on how many new cards you want to see, you can change this. Let's pretend that we change it to, I don't know, I don't want to see that many cards. I want to see 10. Oops. And that will give me 10 new cards. Reviews, this is the part where I do recommend some changes. I think initially this was a different number, but you should be maxing out your reviews every day, because the idea here is to make sure that you're always reviewing things that you've already learned. Otherwise, you'll forget it. Everything else I left as is. And lapses, very briefly, this is when you said that you knew, like this is when you clicked something and you said that you knew the card, but over time you actually forgot it. So it came up again in a review and you forgot it. What are you going to do? This will basically set it back to the status of a new card, and then you're going to have some steps just like the first part here. I wouldn't change anything here. The only thing I would change is I wouldn't suspend a card that you keep on getting wrong. I would actually just tag it, because if you suspend things that you get wrong, then you're never really going to learn it. And these two things I wouldn't change either. And so let's go back to the new cards. Here, this is default 110. I don't actually like this, and this is really up to your own preference. So let me show you what this does, right? When you have 110, if you get a question wrong, it comes back in 1 minute. If you get a question right, it comes back in 10 minutes. And then it will graduate to an interval of 1, right? Because, because that's the graduating interval. So that's cool, but I'm personally someone that favors this kind of setup. So this is 151440. So 1440 is basically how many seconds there are in a day. So let's see what this does when I try to study this card. So 1 plus 1, I think I know that. And so this is what happens. So if I get it wrong, it comes back in 15 minutes. And if I get it right, it comes back in 1 day. That way I'm not doing 10 minutes and then doing another review for 1 day to graduate it. This will just have one review per day if I know that card, assuming it's a new card. So that's something you can decide. This option here is something you can kind of mess with, just not too much, but to mess with based on your own preferences. So I would actually just, if you were starting out, I would recommend 15 to 1140, and everything else should be like this in your settings to start. Okay, great. So the next thing we'll talk about here is how to optimize. So let's make sure I just got everything. Okay, so you can create a new card just like I did here. Let me add. So you can do this, which is a basic flashcard, or you can do something known as a closed deletion. There are a lot of YouTube videos on it, but basically what it does is that you will only have one box here. So let's do that. So you can actually make a field. This is called a closed deletion field, and you can test yourself on what's inside that field. So let's see how this card looks. So I know that one. Let's do this. So this, I'm gonna say I know this one as well, and I got it right. So I'm just gonna press that, right? But that's a special card type that you can do to kind of do like fill in the blanks. And like I said, there are a lot of YouTube videos on how to do that. Okay. So next I'm going to move on to how to integrate Anki into your PittMed curriculum. And the first thing I'm going to do here is browse. So this is the browser. This is how many cards you have in your whole deck, or your entire database of cards. So here, like we said, we suspended all the on-king cards because we don't know all of them. That's why some of them are unsuspended. So what we can do, since we're currently in immunology, is we can kind of scroll down. Let's just clean up by clicking some of these arrows so we're not so messy. But step decks is probably where you're going to find immunology. So we had biochem already. Let's scroll down. Okay, and we got this. So this is immunology, and specifically there's a subdeck of just immunology principles. There's also pathoma that we might use later on. But for now, let's stick with this deck. This deck has 492 cards. And one thing we're going to do right now, assuming you had the add-on that I mentioned, is we're going to just up here in the fields, we're just going to right click, go to advanced, and press created. Oh, I already had it. Okay, great. So created is a good way to kind of sort your cards, because the person that made this entire deck probably made it in a chronological fashion. So we're just going to click on that, and now we can see that the first card he ever made in immunology was this card, which actually seems like a pretty good starting point, right? So we're going to want to unsuspend this card, right? Now how we integrate it is pretty simple. This is what I would recommend for most people, unless you want to do the second part. But this is current subject cards. There's 492, and there's days until final. So today's December 7th. I'm going to say there's about 15 days until we have our final. And there are 492 cards. So how many cards should I do a day to make sure I finish all of this? So let's calculate that. And it would be 492 divided by 15. So roughly 33 cards every day to make sure we finish by the time our test rolls around. So I'm just clicking shift down arrow, and I'm going to unsuspend this many cards. So toggle suspend, great. So now we go back, and we only have 10 new cards. That's because our options, we only allow for 10 new cards a day. Let's say we allow for 100, then we'll see all 33. Great, so now we can study this in whatever fashion we like. I'm just pressing spacebar multiple times. and so on. Okay, so once we're done studying our cards for the day, um, then this should say something along the lines of congratulations, you finished your cards, at which point you're done for the day, right? Um, and that's pretty much how you would use Anki. The thing you have to keep in mind though is that you have to do these reviews pretty much every day, or pretty often, because you're going to not only have new cards, you're also going to have cards that are due on a particular day. And I can kind of show you what that would look like if I switch to my profile. Yeah, so I have, like I have cards that I make for myself. This is the current block that I'm in. I have some due today that I haven't done, and then I also study, some other subjects. And so let's go back to the tutorial just to make sure that everyone is here. Okay, so there's also a different way you can do this. You can be this person that searches terms and unsuspends specifically. This I wouldn't really recommend, but I'll just show you, just so you can kind of get a feel for what that would look like. So I'm going through my syllabus right now, and let's say I bump into something like CVID, and I just want to make sure that I study that in the context of Anki. So what I would do is I would come into my Anking deck, and then I would search for it. So I would CVID and just make sure that these two cards do mention CVID. So look, so that's CVID and that's CVID. So I could just select both of them, and then I could unsuspend them. And I could do that for everything. So I could also do that for selective IGA. So let's make sure that we do that. And you gotta be a little bit more specific sometimes, because it will search for a lot of these other things. So let's see if we can get that. Yeah, so we can get 5 cards related to selective IGA deficiency. I wouldn't recommend this, just because if you're doing this for everything in your syllabus, it can get pretty time consuming. So I would just recommend, doing created, going into that deck, making sure that you can finish all the cards for immunology by the time your test rolls around. And that way you should be well on your way. And again, there's a lot of ways to do this, so this isn't the only way to do it. Last, I'll just mention some sample workflows for these imaginary people. So we have Bob, who hates lecture, and he hates syllabus, and he only wants to do well on the boards. So what he would do is he would probably just look at how many cards he has. So he's about 30,000. He calculates that he's taking STEP in May of next year. And what he would do is he would just calculate, okay, I have 30,000 cards, and I have about 500 days to until I take the exam. So I'm just going to do 60 new cards a day, and I should hit everything in this Zonky deck. I wouldn't recommend that, just because then you lose touch of basically everything in med school. You don't go to lecture, you might not see your friends as much, and also all of this, these are just flashcards. They're not meant to like help you solidify any connections. So what I would recommend is being like Ben. So I read the syllabus from time to time to make sure I'm not missing anything, but I will use Anki as my main thing. So probably then Ben would be doing what we just mentioned, which is just making sure that he finishes all his immunology cards leading up to the final. And every day he's suspending, 33 cards or so, just so he knows that he can get everything, right? At the same time, he's also probably making some cards of his own. So, like in this deck, why I mentioned 15140 is that sometimes you might want to make a card. So, like, what is IgM? Like, I don't know yet. So, let's make sure it's a basic card. What? And so he can make cards for himself. So he can do his own personal deck, and he can also do his Zonky deck. And that's good, because then you get like kind of like a hybrid 50-50. The last thing is Barry. Is I love the syllabus and I love the curriculum. And he doesn't want to really use Zonky. That's also fine, right? He can just make cards for himself, as he goes through the syllabus, and he can kind of test himself on what he wants to like emphasize personally. So those are kind of like three sample workflows. Really, a hybrid is probably the best and will work for most people who are watching this video. But yeah, if you guys have any more questions, you can always like group me, message me. There are also other resources like Reddit. This subreddit is really active and it's completely dedicated to med school Anki. There's also some YouTube channels and some other websites, some blogs of people who have done this really well. But this should get you started on using Anki. And if you guys have any questions, just let me know. All right, cool.